Use the camera.
Thank you. Sorry about
For
that.
me, I
Okay.
usually, where is my camera?
Louisa, can
Okay, so
you pass me
let's start
that?
over. Welcome to our
Pass over?
June meeting.
I'm good at
of
pass
the
over.
CB7 Housing and Land Use Committee.
Sorry,
Sorry.
please
thank you.
excuse me.
No, it's not you. That's okay.
Okay, one more time, an adoption, a motion for adopting the agenda, please. All
Aye.
in favor?
Mm.
Any opposed? Okay. So first item on our agenda is the DNS.
Sure.
Take care.
So Roberta and I are here from the Budget and Strategy Committee, mostly to ask for your help. I know many of you have been through this process in prior years, but where we are right now, we're at the beginning of the process for fiscal year 27 and putting together the request that the community board is going to have for to the city agencies related to the budget. And so there are three things in particular that we're reaching out to the committees to ask for help about in particular. First is the district needs statement. That is one of the city charter mandated publications that the board has to put out. And that is just our statement of needs and priorities that we identify in the community, identifying any of the projects, programs, initiatives that we would really like to put our support behind. And every year we have identified affordable housing as an important issue for the entire district. And we also have a section related to housing and land use and economic development. And so we'd appreciate your help in really taking a fresh look at those sections, making sure it's up to date, making sure that it really reflects the current priorities for the district as we put together that document as a whole. Second thing is we always, or every year we, to the extent that they haven't been funded, we reissue our budget requests to city agencies to get their attention. And it's really an opportunity to put specific issues in front of the city agencies. They provide responses, we engage in dialogue. And so it's an opportunity for us to flag specific budget expense items that we want city agencies to consider. And so we're going to be resubmitting the ones from last year, and we appreciate the committee taking a look at those and also thinking through if there are any other specific budget items that the committee wants us to be identifying and submitting for agency consideration. So those are really the three things that we're looking at. And what we do as a committee, we rely on the other standing committees as subject matter experts to flag issues for us. And then over the summer, we work together to put together the district needs statement, put together the budget priorities, liaise with members of the city council, and try to put everything together so it can be submitted in the early fall. So that is where we are right now, and we're looking forward to engaging in a dialogue with everybody over the coming weeks and months.
Carey, what is your deadline to get input on the district needs statement, whether it's up to date?
So we're targeting the end of this month, but it really is over the summer. So if there are different things that can be done at different times, different information becomes available. So it's an ongoing iterative process, but we know everybody tries not to focus too much on these things over the summer. And so that's where we really like to have our committee doing most of the work.
You mentioned that you're going to put in the things that were in last year's. Is there some indication that what we put in last year's actually got noticed and funded?
Yes, there was a letter that went out in
Appreciate it.
March. There was a letter that went out that we worked on. We get back
Just find out from
January, February, from city planning, the agency's responses to our request. We then create a letter of our responses to their responses.
Yeah.
And we also update the database at that point. And that letter was posted, it was sent to each committee.
I think none of our requests got addressed.
So-
They were also not here.
So this year, last year, we only responded to the request that we have, that we felt we responded to. This year, we responded to every single request. So we either said it's funded, thank you, or it's not funded and we need funding, or we have no idea what you're talking about because your answer was so obtuse.
Right. But they always get noticed to answer the first part of your question. It is an opportunity to take specific issues for the agencies, and they have to respond to it line item by line item. So it is an opportunity for us to try to take that.
I haven't been much involved with this.
Did you find it?
I was very involved for many years with the parks ones, but not recently, so. But generally, my impression was that city agencies, whatever our request was, whether it's a playground or this or that, was, we don't have the money, go find money elsewhere. And the other half of that impression is, to the extent that projects got funded, it was because one of our electeds or more than one of our electeds had discretionary funding, and that accomplished some projects over the years, some at least at parks, moved up and out of our list. Is that still generally what's going on?
We're always an advisory body, and so our ability to force action is always limited, but it is one of the platforms that we have at our disposal. And I do think that it provides a valuable opportunity for us to engage with the dialogue with the agencies, even if they tell us to go speak to the elected officials. It's then a jumping off point for us to have that dialogue with electeds and other city and other relevant bodies as well.
I think that was a yes.
In this process, it's probably a good idea. Things that we want to speak to our elected officials to see if this is what they want, or we can convince them, and then submit it, and then we come with the support to begin with, and we can follow through.
The committee has been doing that for years.
Yes.
Yeah.
And from our perspective, it's better for us to have more material to work with rather than less. So if there are things that are important to the committee, better to pass it on to us, and we'll try to engage in that dialogue.
So that, excuse me, when you say that, you mean that there is value in the community board collecting and giving it, because I know people have said, let's connect up with the elected officials. Naturally, we know politically that can be a good thing, but I would like to see, which has not existed particularly, a standing of that the community board has status and should be able to communicate in a coherent way. And then the elected official will go with us, but we should do the testifying and the material, because that's how we're going to get standing, and it's not going to happen in one day. And it hasn't been particularly good over a number of years anyway.
Right, and in this process, I like to think of the Budget and Strategy Committee as the advocates for the other committees. So even if an elected may not support a particular item, it's helpful for us to know that it's
Yes.
something that you're thinking about, so we can try to champion.
Yes. Also, you could be, I think, helpful in, as the committees provide for you, that you can fix things a little bit and suggest, no, you should really state it this way rather than that. And that's why you're there also, and much appreciated. But we have to do it.
So after we'll ask for maybe some volunteers who might want to help work on this in the next couple of weeks. And I'm thinking of the first draft, and then of course the committee will review all of the materials. I think the budget request might follow after that, but at least we can get to work on the main district needs statement or our sections.
We may not want to concentrate on the numbers just yet. Because
Yeah.
they're sort of up in the air.
Yeah. Oh, should we just take volunteers now?
Did you manage to take the picture?
Anyone else?
Did I what? Did you manage to take the picture from mine?
Okay, maybe you'll get some back to me after.
Yes, it's done.
Thank you.
Thank you. What a bonfire.
I'm gonna need a lot of guidance.
We'll do what we can.
Look, last year's.
Alex, could
Last
we,
year's, not the year before.
could we hear from maybe Lila or Chelsea? Our next item is the Council to Strengthen Local Democracy. We have
What?
a speaker or two.
We do the AMI.
There we go.
Hey, how is everyone doing today? I hope good. I hope good. Hi, my name is Lila Mejia. I'm the Director of Outreach for the New York City Charter Commission, and I have Chelsea on the line, who is the Policy Director and Deputy Director. I'm going to give it over to her because I have to jump into another CB meeting. But I was listening to your beginning conversations and you guys are having really, really great conversations and you're in excellent hands with Chelsea because she is literally the expert in land use. And so without further ado, I just want to turn it over to Chelsea and thank you guys for having us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is this the mayor's commission or
No,
the
this is the
council
council.
commission?
Council.
Yeah, this is the council. I'll get all into that. Yeah, my name is Chelsea Kelly. I'm the Deputy Director of the New York City Commission to Strengthen Local Democracy, which is what we call the Council Initiated Charter Revision Commission. I am also the Director of Land Use. I come from 10 years at the City Council and the Planning and Land Use Division. I've done a ton of projects focused in Manhattan and ULURPs and all kinds of landmarks, everything over the years. So that's kind of the experience that I bring to the table here and where I find myself today. I have a deck that I was gonna run through if that's okay, but I'm not sure if that would be helpful. Okay, cool. Okay, and I do have the ability to share that. So let me bring this up. Hopefully y'all can see that okay.
Not yet.
Oh, not yet. Oh, sorry. Hold on. Oh, I gotta click share. Here we go.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Okay, so some of y'all might know some of this information, so I'm just going to run through it quickly. But what is the Charter Revision Commission? It's a process by which the charter is amended. It's one of the ways the charter can be amended. It can be formed by local legislation, or the mayor can convene a Charter Revision Commission. For the first time, we have both happening right now. Sorry, is somebody talk? I didn't know if somebody had a question. Oh, sorry.
No, we'll hold our questions to the end.
Okay, cool. It's a commission which reviews the city charter, holds public hearings, and can put initiatives on the ballot, which is called a referendum. If voters approve of the ballot proposals, the charter is amended. There's other ways to get proposals on the ballot. Local law can sometimes get proposals on the ballot. A public petitioning process is another way. So we are the New York City Commission to Strengthen Local Democracy. It was created through Local Law 121 of 2024. Our goal is to conduct a comprehensive review of the charter and focus on improving and restoring public confidence in the city government. So I think we're all maybe feeling a little bit that could use some strengthening right now. We're looking at specifically the local level because the charter is our constitution. We've done 2 rounds of public testimony throughout the 5 boroughs. We're about to hit round 3. The commissioners, so Lila and I are staff to the commission. The commission itself is composed of 17 commissioners, co-chaired by Arva Rice, who's the president and CEO of New York Urban League, and Henry Garrido, who's the executive director of DC 37. 9 of the commissioners are appointed by the New York City Council Speaker, Adrienne Adams, and the remaining commissioners are appointed by the mayor, public advocate, comptroller, and 5 borough presidents. Our website is thecommission.nyc if you'd like to find out more information. So just want to throw a timeline up here of kind of the last year of charter revision commissions, or year plus. So in May of 2024, Mayor Adams convened a charter revision commission. They did some outreach for a couple of months and had 5 proposals on the ballot in July of, or they were voted in July of 25th of 2024. So a pretty quick commission. And then in October of 2024, the council introduced legislation to establish a charter revision commission. A little less than a month later, the legislation was approved by the city council. And what that legislation said was that on December 13th, this law will be enacted. And then Mayor Adams decided the day before the local law went into effect and establishing the commission that he was going to create his own charter revision commission, which effectually quote unquote bumps our recommendations or our potential to get on the ballot according to state law. So I get to that in a minute. What are the differences between the commission? So this was, as we said, a council initiated commission. We're going through 15 public hearings, 3 per borough. All of our meetings are also, people can Zoom in like we're doing today. There's representation from citywide elected officials, and we're really focused on strengthening local democracy. We're looking at transparency. We're looking at agency accountability. How do we make our local democracy stronger? We will not be considering any proposals that can be passed by local law necessarily and alone. And then we are not looking to weaken any New Yorkers' right. The 2025 Charter Revision Commission was just convened by Mayor Adams, so he selected all of the appointees to his commission. They look like they're doing 2 meetings per borough. They also have the Zoom option. Like I said, all commissioners appointed by the mayor, and they're really focused on housing and land use and governance. And I've been paying close attention to what's been going on, as I'm sure many of you have as well, so we can talk about that a little bit. When will the questions be on the ballot? So because of the current state law, although there is a proposal to have that law changed, that means that if there are mayor questions on the ballot, then no other questions can appear unless they come from the state. So our questions would not be able to appear on this ballot. So despite, the fact that Mayor Adams convened his charter commission after the council initiated by local law, our questions will most likely not be on the ballot in 2025. They'll likely appear on the ballot sometime in 2026. This could be done in November of 2026. This could be done by a special election. And here's the state bill number that was introduced by Kruger in the state Senate and Simone in the Assembly. And that would prevent future mayors from blocking ballot proposals in this manner. Okay, so we've got some selected photos. This isn't a full representation of all of our hearings, but we started our outreach in March. We've got the second round in April and May, and the third round is coming up in next week. And then we've released our preliminary report in April. And then we just last week released our updated report, which you can all find prominent on our website. So the focus areas of the updated staff recommendations is kind of what we're calling our update to the preliminary report are in 3 categories: government accountability, budget transparency, and our favorite, land use. I'm just going to breeze through these since we're focused on housing and land use, but I just wanted to give you a flavor of kind of the things that we're talking about. A lot of our commissioners are, I'll just say this outright. It's kind of awkward having another commission that's focused solely on housing and land use. With my experience, I'm like, there's so many things I would love to do when it comes to housing and land use, but looking at it through the lens of strengthening local democracy and, also assuming that the other commission is going to have questions and paying close attention to the types of things they're talking about. We do have different focuses. So anyways, and a lot of the focus here is on government accountability. So we're thinking of strengthening independent oversight agencies to ensure democratic integrity and the balance of powers. So these are the independent agencies that are supposed to have boards that are, more democratically selected. We're thinking about expanding the council's advice and consent powers to create guardrails and opportunities for public input when the mayor selects appointees for positions of power, such as commissioners. So right now we're actually, our proposal, it says, as it stands today, what we're recommending the commission take on is to have every commissioner in the city subject to advice and consent from the council, which I think is, right now there's around 70 something that the council has advice and consent over. And this would be an expansion to 33 more. I might be misspeaking, but it's something like that. We're thinking about creating a process for impeaching or recalling the mayor, including local options for addressing mayoral misconduct. The New York Times wrote an article on this last week that we have linked on our website. We're rethinking mayoral emergency powers, which could create transparency around the unilateral suspension of laws. We found, especially after the COVID-19 pandemic, there was a lot of emergency powers have been used in the past few years. Some of them make a ton of sense to be used. We know that we need to kind of tweak some stuff in a real nimble way when we're in a crisis, but where are the boundaries? We're noticing that some of these things have just gone on and on. So we're looking closely at that. And then we're also looking at allowing local ballot questions submitted by the council to be voted on at special elections. So this is kind of like just a tweak. Right now, they can only come up at general elections. When it comes to budget transparency, I don't know who's familiar, if I wasn't familiar with the term of units and appropriation in my narrow land use world, but this is basically saying, you know, the amount of dollars, saying more specifically how dollars can be spent. They're called the building blocks of the city budget. So we're looking at allowing for smaller units of appropriation, which would improve public transparency, understanding of agency budgets by program, and the utility of the mayor's management report. We're looking at improving transparency and accountability in contracting. I think both commissions have heard a lot about how difficult it's been for nonprofits to get their funding in a timely fashion. Looking at clarifying the boundaries of spending authority, improving fiscal stability during uncertain times, and increasing transparency in budget forecasting and fairness in budget negotiation. These are all areas I am not super familiar with. My colleagues are fantastic at explaining this stuff. We're happy to come speak more to the board or other committees, but please take a look at our website. We've been working really hard to break things down into language that's digestible. Okay, so finally to land use. So really what we've been focused most on are these kind of like two things. We did look at the ULURP pre-certification process, but ultimately, you know, realize that there's a lot of changes that need to happen at state law. And frankly, there's a lot that the city could be doing today to kind of change seeker if they wanted to, that the mayor disclosed in his own blast task force report that he hasn't acted on. So we decided to drop that recommendation. We didn't feel it was appropriate for charter revision. So we're looking at holding agencies accountable to strengthen the fair housing plan and community planning. Get into this more in the next slide. And we're also looking at reforming the city office space acquisition process to prevent fraud and utilize appropriate expertise. So in bucket number one, more specifically, we're looking at revising the 197A community planning process to make it easier for community boards to plan for their own development and requiring the Department of City Planning to conduct neighborhood studies for potential rezonings and infrastructure investments in areas that are not doing their fair share of housing production. So I'll just pause there for a second. The council created a local law in December of 2023 that was called the Fair Housing Framework Law. It created section 16A of the charter, and starting in October of this year, there's going to be a citywide housing production target. And there's also going to be housing production targets by community district. So this is going to be new information that we have. This is being conducted mostly, I think the HPD is the agencies that is taking the lead on this. So what we're looking at is how can we use this new, amazing, equitable planning framework, which the city has been lacking for a very long time, and kind of think of ways that we can actually plan, right? Like we do a lot of ULURPs that are small ULURPs throughout the city, but how do we actually look at where are inequities when it comes to housing development? How do we support the housing development with investments in infrastructure, in parks, and all of this? And how do we really encourage community boards to be allowed to do that planning itself? 197A, maybe many of you are familiar or heard of it. It hasn't been utilized much in the past like 10, 20 years. So I think part of that is because community boards need support. And part of that is because the plans don't really have any teeth. They don't go anywhere. So could we make this more meaningful and kind of force the Department of City Planning and the City Planning Commission to take this plans more seriously if they meet the criteria in the fair housing framework? So in other words, if the idea we're exploring, in other words, is if a community board or community district is not meeting its housing or it sees its housing production target, can they come up with a plan and then basically use 197A instead of ULURP, right? To kind of move that plan forward. So that's the first kind of idea. The second idea is to simply explicitly state that it's the responsibility of the Department of City Planning and the City Planning Commission to develop policies that promote equitable housing development. There's a lot of this kind of language in other departments like the HPD in the charter, but it does not, it's not something that's explicit here. And we need to make sure that the department and the commission see that this is their duty to actually do this work. We shouldn't have planning that's just done at the whim of every mayor that wants to come in. We'll rezone this neighborhood or that neighborhood or this neighborhood. Like, let's have it guided by something and give the communities the first shot at doing that planning. Thirdly, what you were just talking about, the state district needs statements, the statement of district needs. So the idea was that we would amend the charter to require that community boards reference their district specific 5-year housing production targets out of the fair housing framework and include strategies to meet those targets in their annual statement of district needs. So this kind of gets to the first part, but it's not that this really in-depth planning exercise, but at least so that every year the community districts throughout the city are really thinking about, you know, forced to kind of grapple with these numbers that are going to be coming out every 5 years and taking advantage of the borough president's office, the Department of City Planning, the Civic Engagement Commission to provide them with data and strategies and think about areas in the district that might be appropriate for certain strategies for housing development. It doesn't always mean rezoning. It could mean housing preservation, things like that. And then we also want to, and this kind of speaks to well, this could have implications for a project that's, I think, just south of your district, although may abut it, is that we want to think about ways to create a higher threshold for the City Planning Commission to deny applications that are supported by community boards and the borough presidents. These are ULURP applications that would be supported. So the idea here is that, you know, there's been a couple of examples over the years where we've had community-based plans happen. One is going on in the Morningside Heights community. And there's been a lot of resistance from the Department of City Planning to allow for these plans to proceed. So what we wanted to think about was how can we kind of give these types of plans where the Department of City Planning, who's extremely intertwined with the City Planning Commission, to maybe not rely so heavily on Department of City Planning and actually give these community-based plans a fair shot to actually get through the ULURP process. And then, so that's kind of all of the recommendations in that bucket. And then I'll quickly just highlight this last one, which is about this is specifically for Charter Section 195 office leases. None are coming to mind that have been in your district in my memory, but that doesn't mean they haven't happened. I'm sure they've happened before, but these are applications. They're not ULURP. They're Section 195. It's when the city wants to acquire office space for city agencies within private buildings. So what we'd like to do is add a little more transparency around that process. Right now, where these are largely real estate transactions, and sorry, I should back up. These applications have a very narrow window. Their DCAS is always the applicant. DCAS will then give the application to the City Planning Commission. The City Planning Commission has 30 days to approve it. And then the City Council can not necessarily call it up, but they can choose to disapprove the application within 20 days. So we feel like these are largely financial transactions as they are lease contracts. And we feel that and this is a lot of this is coming from my experience at the City Council for so long and seeing so many of these applications throughout the city, is like, we just don't have enough information about them. We have nothing about the financials. We don't know the other sites that were contemplated, which we do for other types of acquisitions, like a school siting, for example. So there's just like not a lot to work with on these applications. The 1989 charter created this and had a very narrow view, I think, about what these applications would be. And so we think that it would be more appropriate for them to be reviewed by the comptroller instead of the City Planning Commission, and to kind of beef up the applications to talk more about the financial transaction. So those are the land use bucket. I thought I had a couple other slides here. These are all just more details, but I did just want to throw this page up here so that you all saw our socials, and then our upcoming hearings. So we've got, and next week we're in Staten Island and the Bronx on Monday and Tuesday. Our Manhattan hearing is going to be focused more generally on government accountability. But if you'd like to testify on any of our land use applications, we'd love to hear any feedback. If you're supportive, if you're not supportive, why or why not. And then we're having I'm sorry?
I'm sorry, when is the Manhattan here? I couldn't.
The Manhattan, I'm sorry, it's on Monday, June 23rd at the Museum of the City of New York. And I can follow up with all this information. And then we're also having, and this slide was not updated, so I don't have this on here, but at our Brooklyn hearing, that's going to be at the Sunset Park Library on June 26th, which is the Thursday. We are going to be having, this is going to be particularly focused on land use. So if you'd prefer to zoom in on that one, that would be an appropriate one to kind of weigh in on as well. And they're all from 5 to 7 p.m. So that is my presentation. I'd be happy to, should I take?
I think we have some questions.
Yes, please.
Okay. Go ahead.
Chelsea, who decides what's a fair share of a community's housing production? It seems that if it's coming from outside the community, it might not reflect what's good for the community. Mm-hmm. And is it quantity or what type of housing? How specific is it, or is just you need 2,000 units, but what if in the past 5 years you've done 80,000 units?
Yep.
And now you're going to have a requirement, with your fair share. It's disturbing.
Well, I wouldn't call it disturbing yet before you have answers to some of those questions. Maybe concerning would be a good word, but
I just want to include that this board did a rezoning of 97th to 110th between Park and the River, the largest rezoning. And a large part of it was to restrict what housing could be built.
Well, what I want to clarify is that the part of the framework looks at how much has been done over the past 10, 15 years already. So they do a look back, and then they're going to look forward as well. So they'll look at total number of units, affordable units, deeply affordable units, units for the formerly homeless, and preservation of affordable units, which I think is going to be a big key one in your community, because there are like a lot of, I think that preservation is probably one of the key pieces, affordable housing preservation. So these are probably, and because it's the, we haven't seen what this is going to look like yet, because it's coming out for the first time in October. It is not completely clear to me, like, how it's all going to shake out. But these are the pieces that have been dictated in the charter. And then the other part of it is going to be a strategic assessment. So what they're going to also look at is what kind of strategies are appropriate in each community as well. So they might make recommendations like, well, look, we've got a lot of rent stabilized units in these buildings. We actually need to, but they're starting to be in bad shape. Maybe we need to work with the owners to get them into a preservation deal. We have maybe in another community, it's like, well, they haven't had, they're zoned for 1 to 2 family buildings. Obviously, this is not the Upper West or your part of the district, but, or you're part of the city, but like, some parts in the outer boroughs might look like, well, this zoning hasn't been touched for, 70 years or whatever. Like maybe we should think about some zoning strategies here. So there's going to be a plethora of things that are looked at.
If I can just follow up, I appreciate what you're saying, I just know that when we did this, the mayor's office in the city wanted us to upzone. And it was not, we felt it was not going to be able to preserve the economic diversity, the racial and ethnic diversity, and the type of housing that was appropriate in our neighborhood to preserve the nature of our neighborhood over many, many years. And that's what the community wanted. We did work with city planning, and they cooperated with us tremendously. But what was disturbing to me is who's making that determination, okay, for each community. It basically tells the community, we've determined that you need this, you need that, and you the other thing. And so I'm not criticizing you. You're communicating, but that's something that we have to look out for here.
Yeah, that's fair.
Richard?
Yeah, just to follow up on that, although I'm not concerned or alarmed, I am a little confused. We've been dealing with the phrase affordable housing, and that's our committee and our board.
Yeah.
Talks in terms of affordable housing. You've introduced a phrase that I haven't heard before, equitable housing development.
Yeah.
And I have no idea what that means.
My question too.
It's not one of these self-explanatory.
Sure.
What is equitable housing development? And is there anything in what the council is now proposing that specifically addresses affordable housing?
Yeah, so the equitable housing development in a concept is something that can also be, I would say, is synonymous with fair housing. So there's you're looking at so it's the equitable distribution of housing around areas that have access to things like good transit, good schools. These are sometimes they're referred to as sorry, I'm forgetting what some other cities call them, but it's basically like areas of the city that aren't like, sorry?
No,
Sorry.
So I don't think it's a big secret that there's been a lot of housing policy over the past 100 years or so, or way beyond that, but that have created segregation, right? So when we think about fair housing and we think about equitable development, we're trying to think about ways to desegregate communities. So what that means is that we tend to see low-income communities of color have limited access to open space, to schools, to transit, to and are also overburdened by things like transfer stations that are overburdened by noxious uses. Like I live out in Brooklyn, I'm close to Sunset Park. Like it's known as an environmental justice community because of the old, industrial waterfront that is still bringing lots of trucks to our neighborhood, and the remnants of the zoning from a long time ago that are no longer being utilized as much. So there's like a lot of things that are going on. So when we think about equity, we're thinking about, well, there's parts of the city that have not really been doing much to create housing options in areas that are places where people would like to live. Bloomberg downzoned a lot of the city, and those places are now kind of like live in these protected communities. And meanwhile, de Blasio is, upzoned, and Bloomberg and a little bit of Mayor Adams are just like upzoning communities that are already concentrated communities of color that are rapidly gentrifying. So how do we think about a way where we're trying to distribute this a little more fairly? So that's the idea and the concept behind equitable development.
Thank you.
Louisa?
Okay, I just wanted to ask, you suggested that the community boards now could develop their own plans and 197A plans, and that this would take the place of ULIP. But a 197A plan is starting from the beginning and developing a concept, etc. ULIP is the process for passing it, going through the city.
Right.
How do you equate them the same? They're not the same.
No, they're not the same. I'm sorry if that's the way I delivered that. But what I'm trying to say is that, well, I think part of the problem with the 197A planning process is that you go through this really long planning process, right? And you're going back and forth and you're coming up with these, some are great ideas, maybe some need to fall off, maybe DCP has some terrible ideas that you need to say, wait, we didn't want that. But there's a lot of open dialogue and there's a lot of participation. And I think that there's a lot of value into that type of planning process. The fact that now you need to get that plan, you restart that planning process in order to get into ULIRP and go through it again seems onerous. So we're trying to explore how you can, instead of doing a two-part process, if you are able to go through the 197A planning process, to rethink that in a way where it could actually land in the approvals.
I'm sorry, I just didn't follow that because 197A is a community process to put a proposal before city planning, which will then move it through the various entities that will look at it and will approve it. They don't have, I mean, really, you're talking apples and oranges, it seems to me. There's very little place where they overlap.
Can you tell me more about that? Because I understand that. I mean, I'm surprised to hear there's very little place that they overlap. I understand from a process standpoint, they are separate. I'm extremely familiar with that, but we're looking to potentially change that process because no one uses 197A anymore. And we feel that 197A is a better process that has more value rather than just getting into ULIRP and being in this mysterious pre-certification phase for however long.
Yes, I appreciate the fact that you would like to go back to 197A, which is a shame that it's not used anymore. But it might be better perhaps to look at why it is not, and why the communities aren't using it, because it really is different from ULIP, which was put into effect to make sure that all the different entities in the government would have a chance to review a project.
Yeah, thank you for the feedback. I mean, we would love to hear more about that for sure. I've done a ton of research on it, and I'm well aware of what you're saying, but please let me know if I have it wrong that the issue with the 197A process, what I've taken from my research and talking to folks and lived in and been working in this space for a long time, is that it's a very onerous process, an expensive process, and it doesn't necessarily land in action. And those were the kind of, sorry?
Too often it doesn't end up because the community does not have the funds to have the research and have all the work done that's necessary. What that city planning does have, because it's the community conducting a planning process that is onerous because it takes forever and there's so many different interests in the community. And down the line, it's found that very few, I think one I know of in the past 10 years. So maybe that process needs to be modified in some way or funded better to make it work. If that's what, whatever the process is, it needs to be modified and strengthened if that's what you're looking for.
Because bringing planning back to the community board is a great idea. I'm just saying that it's really different from ULIP, which is just an approval process.
Well, sorry, just to clarify, I'm not advocating for 197A and ULIRP. We just kind of let them be. It is 1000% updating it so that they could work better. But the idea and concept is that it could work in place. So to remove that second hurdle. So if you could improve the 197A planning process so that it addresses the issues that it has today, and it would work better to do what I'm talking about, basically. So I just want to make that clear. I've got my charter revision hat on all the time now, so I'm just constantly thinking about how can we get creative to make our charter work better. So it's hard sometimes to bring up something that has so much history.
Yeah, so I'm kind of wondering and confused how this discussion and potential proposals affect us. I mean, I was a real skeptic on city of yes housing because of the nature of our neighborhood, and I still am a skeptic as to whether that will produce any significant new, certainly privately financed housing, although we have an interesting thing going on with Extel for some units.
What?
But it may happen. We are so dense, we are fully built. I mean, we don't have any empty lots. If we have any, it's not any I know of. But beyond that, people with money have always, and still do, want to live in Manhattan.
Yeah.
And so I just don't understand how the equitable housing development, which you sort of defined for Richard, but I didn't quite get it, or what you call it, affordable housing, or any concept of fair, there was another term, fair something distribution or something.
Anti-segregation.
Yeah, I don't understand how any of that's gonna do anything for us.
I think it's a fair point. I think you've got a really unique district that's pretty built out. And I think some of this, when it comes to equitable development, there's not really a ton of space to bring things to your part of the district, frankly. So it's a valid point. I think in other parts of the city, what's really important to look at is there's 58 other community districts in the city that haven't been doing their fair share of housing development and, are not open to density, even if it's like a 6-story building, right? When you've got 25 to 30% of those units in there that are permanently affordable, and, as you pointed out, affordable can mean different things, but we mean that it would be in some kind of regulatory agreement or some kind of restriction that would create them at certain levels of affordability that would be established. It's on a site-by-site basis, as I think many of you know. So I'm not going to sit here and say that it's going to be that this is something that has a ton of relevance. I do think that when it comes to the community planning framework, it really could. I think we'll see what those numbers say in October when the planning comes out. I think even the simple fact that having the community boards kind of grapple with, look at what the HPD and other city agencies came out of this fair housing framework law. Look at what they're telling us equitable development is. We should grapple with that and say something about it and think seriously about the strategies that they're recommending and if we think they're appropriate or not.
I have a question about 195. My understanding from the 89 Charter Revision Commission is that this was really about making sure that office space wasn't all concentrated in Manhattan, and that's why it was given to the City Planning Commission. You're suggesting to give it all to the controller, to one person. Just wanted to understand why, when the intent was clearly about distributing office space across all 5 boroughs, you think that power should now be centralized in one person?
Well, okay, so you're right that part of it, that was part of the thinking, but what we're finding is that, well, a lot of the office space is still in Manhattan. For one, a lot of the agencies, the agencies are going to decide where their office space needs are. So if they are an agency that services a part of Brooklyn and they need to have offices located in there, they're gonna want office space there, right? So what we found, and they're still subject to the fair share criteria, which is the siting criteria that you're bringing up. So DCAS is still going to need to talk about that and talk about why it's appropriate in this part of the city. But I think the 1989 charter, they talked about section 195, and they also talked about another type of application that's subject to ULURP, which is called site selection, which is really where there's more like, how do I say this? It's more controversial types of office space that need to be distributed, or not just like office space, it's like agency centers or agency space. So yeah, basically what we're saying is the reason why we're talking about the comptroller is because there's no disclosure of the financial information, which in the past year or two, we've realized with this mayor in particular that there's been some deals that have been shady or potentially shady. There was one in Manhattan in Community District 1 where the board actually wrote a letter to the city, to the Department of City Planning after they had already written a recommendation that said it would be that they were good with it. They then came back and were like, well, we didn't realize that the financial dealings of this, and now we have issues with it. So the problem was there wasn't the appropriate amount of information being disclosed in the application at the time. So the first thing that we tried to think about was, oh, we should just beef up these applications. But then we're like, well, no, the City Planning Commission isn't really the experts when it comes to financial lease negotiations. And that's why we felt like it's more appropriate for them to go to the comptroller. And if you've ever listened to City Planning Commission hearings on some of these site selections, they're not talking about the appropriate distribution of sites across the city, really. I mean, they might touch on that because of the fair share criteria, which DCAS will still have to prove that it's disclosing that fair share criteria, but they have to, sorry, it's a little distracting because people keep talking, but anyway, sorry, I lost my train of thought, but basically the comptroller, when the City Planning Commission is talking about these applications, they're talking about, are the city offices going to have cubicles or closed office spaces? And are these really the types of things we want our commissioners talking about? Like, is this really their area of expertise? Like, anyways, yeah.
No. I want this to end. This is
Go ahead.
It's just very
You know,
political.
many of your recommendations deal with transparency, which is always a good thing. There's one agency, though, that really needs to be told to be transparent, and that's HPD.
Oh, yeah.
And we've had experience. There was a building that just went up on 96th Street between Broadway and West End.
Yep.
And it involved a deal between HPD and the developer, a very responsible developer. We had no reason to believe that there was any hanky-panky or anything. But the question was, how much of the development should be devoted to affordable housing? And the answer we got back is, this is as much as we can afford to do, given the financial realities. When we asked HPD and the developer for information concerning their proposed construction costs, we didn't know whether the building was being sold or given to this developer. We didn't know anything about it. And HPD would not tell us anything about how they concluded that a certain number of units should be affordable and no more. So if you're going to consider transparency in the land use process, I would start with HPD.
Good idea.
Thanks for that feedback.
May I just ask the chairs or the guest, how long will this go on? What is the outcome here? Because are you asking us to consider recommendations and to act on that? I mean, I could very simply, I happen to be, by the way, a certified planner. I mean, and I was at one point the head of the American Planning Association of this old place in New York, so I was that. But mostly, I have been motivated and work at the sort of community aspect. I want the community to be defining always its needs, learning about it, working at it together, and then going to the best parts of government agencies selected. How do you do it? And then come back, get that we are to give the criteria, keep doing it, and then working with the government, say, what is this mechanism? The first thing I want to ask you, I mean, it's an old thing. Why is 197A, which was so highly touted for years, but a hell of a difficult thing to try to even deal with, why is it that it isn't happening at all and nobody's interested anymore? What's happening? I'd like to get a case so it would help me at least and us to figure out what the division of labor is. And the last thing, the obvious, community board members, it's not their full-time job. They are experts on how they are living and doing and working here, and they are experts in the community. They are not necessarily the technical people, some may be, but the thing is to make and it's hard to know that a whole bunch of 50 people who are working in other things in life, for them to learn all of this as well. Maybe for the community boards to be the prime ones to describe and work at the values of the community, how we want it to happen, and do it very well, all of us with a lot of communication, and then get to the planners and say, don't tell us what we need, we're telling you, and you tell us how to do it. And that's the division of labor. So, I mean, and lastly, with all due respect, because I really appreciate what we're trying to do, I just wonder how long we should go on with this and what an outcome is, because I know other things are on the agenda.
So can I jump in? The context is that there are these two charter review commissions happening right now.
Yeah.
Right, the council,
Yeah.
the mayors.
Right.
They are going to draft something in the way of measures that will appear on the ballot. So this is our opportunity to get ahead of that before they're drafted. Once they're drafted, we can just say yes or no.
So are you, asking for assigning some of us, or you want people to do it and then present testimony, or what? I don't know.
So the reason that we are doing all of this tonight, because this is our last meeting for the summer, right, is to say, hey, do we want to weigh in on this? The answer might be, okay, I don't know about all this stuff, but personally, I can make a decision on it. Or it can be, hey, we have some feedback and we like this and we don't like that and we want to see this. And that's the discussion that we would like to have. Chelsea has sort of laid the table for us, at least on the council side. We have a couple of slides, and also Adam is on the staff of the mayoral charter review commission. So looking at all of this either separately or together, how do we want to respond, I guess is the answer. And the answer could be nothing, or it could be something.
So are we going to have a similar discussion, but no presentation unless Adam is chatting about it, on the mayors? Because, I started to read yesterday, and I just ran out of time.
Totally. There was a video.
60 page or whatever. I just
sent.
couldn't continue, or today either. So are we sort of tonight going to try to slice and dice the mayoral one too?
That was the hope. The video was sent around. I don't know if any didn't sound like they watched it. Maybe they did. But it was about a half an hour presentation, different but similar to what Chelsea did for us to sort of lay the groundwork of here are the different things they're trying to address. I took screenshots of the sort of 3 or 4 most important slides on the housing and land use side. We can then sort of discuss that as well. Maybe this is a situation where it's just too much and we want to have another meeting. Open to suggestions.
I don't see how we can craft a comprehensive and
Yes.
uh,
We certainly
understandable
can.
position tonight without having looked at
Right,
the documents in greater detail.
Okay.
yes.
I must admit, I skimmed, I was very pleased to get this presentation, but it raises more questions
Yes,
than answers. And the devil is in the language, I suspect.
right.
So if we're going to weigh in at all, I say we can't do it tonight.
Right.
And we should have, I think it's important to weigh in, and I think it's important enough so that maybe we should have another meeting
Right.
later in June.
Good.
I'm in agreement, and particularly, it was good to see the two plans.
Yeah.
And it's clear from what Chelsea said, that we're not gonna get a chance to vote on the city council's commission, because the mayor's takes precedence, and that would be it. So we should focus on that and come up with what we would like to see changed, or what we would want to support and how it would apply to us.
Right.
Thank
Does
you.
that
makes sense.
Yeah.
And I would suggest that maybe before, whatever date we set for the meeting, people sort of exchange ideas
Mhm.
by email, so that we don't come in and start from scratch.
Okay, and it sounds like we're gonna table the council's,
I think Sheldon's
Recommendations
right.
for
You know, the chances of the council's proposals seeing daylight in 2025 are slim. The only thing that we might want to do is, if there's anything in particular that we want to push for, we can certainly ask that the mayor's commission consider it.
Yeah.
Good idea.
Okay, so do you want to look at those screenshots of the mayor's? Yeah, okay, let me see if I can. pull it back up.
I'm gonna leave. Thank you for having me.
Thank you
Oh,
so much.
thank you,
Chelsea.
Chelsea.
Sorry about
Thank
that.
Thank you.
I did just want to let you know we are wrapping our feedback next month, so we would appreciate if you did have anything to say on our recommendations that you would submit them. But thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, so, as you know, Adam, do you want to say something, or?
I'm happy to try to walk through this. I think the video did a really nice job as well. It's really up to you guys.
No, go for it.
Okay. So just like as context, the council's charter revision commission, as she just described, has like articulated what their ideas are. Our commission is very much still working. So what this presentation describes is the preliminary feedback we heard from people about places to look in the charter for potential changes and ways that people might think about changing the charter. So, okay, we'll guess. I'll try to think which slides you have. For this one.
I can run through them really quickly.
I mean, so for the main thing we looked at, and I guess this is just the housing and land use section, is that everyone knows that we're in a housing crisis, right? There's a shortage of housing. There's a huge dearth of affordable housing. And the question is like, you know, how are we here? What process do we have that might have caused that to happen? And there are all sorts of things that the state controls, right? The state controls really important things like environmental review. It controls really important things like rent control and rent stabilization. And those are things that the New York City Charter doesn't weigh in at all, right? So all the Charter Revision Commission can focus on is things in the New York City Charter. So on this slide, what we're looking at is why do we not, what are the problems we have with housing production essentially? And this map on the right, the darker areas are the areas that see the most rezonings, the lighter areas see fewer rezonings, and most importantly, there's some areas that haven't seen a single rezoning in the last 10 years. So those are areas that haven't had a single ULURP. So no one is trying to produce new housing there. And that's a big problem when, you know, we have this citywide housing crisis. And so the solution is going to be citywide. The other thing that we saw when we looked at all of the rezonings from the past decade is that they're never small rezonings, essentially. If someone is bringing a rezoning, they're bringing a gigantic rezoning where, you know, the lot may be allowed a 4-story building and now they're looking for a 12-story building, right? We found only one example where someone wanted to increase the floor area ratio by less than 35%, right? So people are always looking for really big jumps. And the other thing is that there have only been 2 that tried to change within like the low density districts. So that would be like R1 to R5. So when people are bringing these rezonings, they're bringing really big rezonings. So rezonings aren't happening in a lot of part of the city. And when we do have rezoning, they tend to be a really big rezoning. And then this is kind of the set of things that we heard about, like, how could we look at improving the
ridiculous.
process,
I
right?
know.
So one set of things were reducing process costs. So that would be, how can we make the process faster, right? One sense would be, so that's like making a fast track, changing ULURP in some way to make it faster, or other kind of changes. Elevating citywide needs. So do we need like comprehensive planning, where instead of what we have now, which is a zoning code, a zoning resolution, and then we make changes for specific neighborhoods or projects, should we look at all of New York City at once? And also for elevating citywide needs, there is a question of, do we need to elevate borough-wide or citywide actors, right? So historically, borough presidents played a really big role in the land use process. Today, their role is advisory. The borough presidents, unsurprisingly, have been saying, like, maybe we should play a bigger role. And then the last piece was on leveraging public land, which is just, I think, pretty uniformly, people think that if the city owns land and the city wants to develop affordable housing on that land, we should make that process as easy as possible. But sometimes it can get really complicated with lots of overlapping procedural requirements when most people are in agreement that we should be developing 100% affordable housing. And then the only, on this climate and infrastructure, one kind of interesting thing we heard is that we know we're in this climate crisis, we need to respond to it. But the same sort of thing that can slow down housing also can slow down climate and infrastructure improvements, whether that's street raisings actually require like a tremendous amount of process, trying to do things like, let's say there's an area that we think is really at risk of flooding from hurricanes, and we want to offer people who live in those areas where we're like, this is going to flood again. We can't build a seawall to protect it because it just doesn't make sense. You know, your house was built on wetlands. Should there be a process to make it easier for the city to say, like, we think your house is worth $350,000 or $500,000, whatever, you know, the fair market value is, would you be willing to sell your house to the city and move somewhere else so that, you know, we can kind of do managed retreat in certain areas? You know, this happened after Sandy in Staten Island with federal funds. The city was able to buy properties where they said rebuilding here is just not a great idea because it's going to flood again. But is there a way to do what are called blue sky? So rather than waiting for the storm to come and destroy someone's house, is there a way to buy the house ahead of time? And that is really challenging to do right now because of how the charter is involved with land acquisitions. We would essentially have to go through ULURP to do something like that. So those sorts of like climate and resiliency things that relate to land use. And then the city map. This one's really interesting, but you know, New York City used to be 5 boroughs, right? And each borough still maintains the copy of the city map. So for example, if you wanted a map of the Brooklyn Bridge, you could get half of it in Manhattan and half of it in Brooklyn. Maybe that made sense in 1898, but today it might make sense to unify it all. And this can be a really big deal for when HPD, for example, is trying to do affordable housing projects and they need to find out like, okay, was this street mapped properly? Was it not? Who has it? Things like that. And then the other one that's kind of related to the city map that people have talked about, which I think is just super interesting, is if you want to raise a street, it needs to be recorded in the city map because the map decides what the elevation of the streets are. And that's really important for zoning because building heights are not based off of what the street is in reality. It's what the street is on the map. So if it's 65 feet, you can go 65 feet off of what the street map says the street should be built at. And what that means is if we're repaving a road in Red Hook, for example, and we want to raise the street like 2 feet, we're doing all this work, we're tearing everything up. We've like brought the machine in that pulls the asphalt, we're going to put new asphalt. This street floods all the time. We should really raise this street a little bit. We actually can't raise the street without changing the city map, which requires going through ULURP, which requires 6 to 7 months. So obviously, we spend all this money repaving the street and then it floods again. So there's been talk about, should we change that process to say that if you're just trying to raise the street for climate resiliency, like maybe that's different from, trying to change the street
That's
for
something
other
different.
reasons.
What?
It's not a remapping.
Yeah, it's not, I mean.
Not city map for zoning, city map for street grades.
I think that's it.
Come on.
And then the non-housing and land use stuff is around elections and nonprofit payment.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great presentation.
Yes. So Adam, if you buy somebody's house because it might flood next year, you created another household that needs a home. You're net minus.
Yes, I think where we're really looking at this and is parts of the area that are in the 100-year floodplain that flood a lot. And what you end up with is, if you don't have a system like this, you wait for the storm to come, and then the person still ends up without a house when the storm destroys the house. It makes a lot of sense to try to do this ahead of time, especially because if you are able to acquire these properties, you can do something that we care a lot about on this board, which is instead of having hardscape where there is something, you can turn it into softscape. You can absorb more of that water, which means that the properties that do remain are less likely to flood.
But what you don't do is rebuild on stilts.
I mean, that's what you can rebuild on stilts, and that is what a lot of people have done after these storms. It's, the stilts help for flooding, they don't help for other things necessarily. I think it's just about making sure there's optionality, and some people don't want to rebuild on stilts. It's getting harder and harder to get flood insurance that would allow you to rebuild on stilts, So I think there are a lot of reasons why something like this could be interesting.
The managed retreat would be not rebuilding.
Managed retreat would mean basically saying like, yep, this area, instead of being used for like residential, it's gonna be much better as part of, a blue belt, the stormwater, like returning it, creating more like coastal wetlands that can absorb the water when we get these high tides and things.
Do you have any sense how many units would be eligible for this repurchase?
So there's lots of discussion about like what this would look like, but I think the general idea would be that the city council would be able to say like, hey, we think in this area, we think this many units, we're willing to, budget this much money. Right now, the acquisition process for how the city can acquire land requires going through ULURP, requires going through site selection and all of these things. So this would create a new process for the city council to say like, hey, these are areas where we think there should be managed retreat.
No, but has anyone explored the number of units that would be affected if the charter change?
It just creates all of these charter changes are just process changes. So it would still be up to the city council to say like, yes, we think this is a process worth using, or no, it's not. And the other thing is, this is all voluntary. So you cannot be, eminent domain exists, right? And the state can use that. But this would just be like, you live somewhere where the city council has said, hey, we think this is somewhere. If you want, and if you agree, this is something you can do. Because right now what we're hearing is people saying like, this sounds great, but like, I can't wait half a year to a year to find out if this is gonna happen when I'm trying to decide, should I move my business? Should I move my home? Things like that.
Maybe we talk about tariffs. What I'm a little confused about is who makes these decisions? The reason for ULURP, which I'm not defending ULURP, but before ULURP, it was really that the borough presidents made all the decisions. And the idea of ULURP was to spread it out and to bring the various communities in different sizes and, which is why the borough president power was diminished into effect. But what it sounds like is that both of these revisions give the city council so much more power. Do we want that? Have we thought of it in terms of the city council having that much power?
I think part of
I mean, some cities work like that.
Yeah, I think right now the city council has a tremendous amount of power in New York City, and in the report, we talk a lot about that, the practice of member deference. And so some people have suggested that there are other ways to change that. For example, some people have said, well, if the city council approves something, if the city planning commission approves something and the city council rejects it, the city planning commission maybe should be able to approve it with a super majority, like it should go back. Some people have said like borough presidents, rather than going before the city council, should go after the city council. There are all sorts of different ideas that people
What
have
about the
suggested.
mayor's veto power?
Yeah, so there's discussion of like, the Municipal Art Society
Right.
suggested that rather than have a mayoral veto, there should be like, you should have the speaker of the city council, the borough president of the affected borough, a member from the community board, and the mayor should then, jointly have essentially, instead of a mayoral veto, which is one person, you should have these 4 people, and if they take a vote, they can overrule the city council. So that
makes
was,
sense to have an odd number of people.
that's a really good point.
Right.
So there've been lots of
Or
different
have some odd
suggestions for what things like that could look like. And there's also been a lot of discussion around what Chelsea was describing earlier, which is the idea that like there are going to be targets for communities, like thinking about should that be given more power? Should there be like a simpler system? But the idea of saying like, maybe we do need to come up with some way of making sure that the districts that are not building anything do actually build things. Like the map that's up now. Oops, it shows, well, it'll come back. I guess a great example that I've been thinking about is if you look at how many affordable so what this map shows is all of the buildings that have resulted from ULURP applications. And like, you can see that there are basically none. There's one on Staten Island, right? There are very few in Queens. Parts of the Bronx have a ton, other parts of the Bronx don't. Like, how can we think about making that more equitable? So lots of discussion about ways to do that. So, yeah.
Adam, could you talk a little bit more about some of the other changes that are being proposed to ULURP? I know there's like a timing change considered.
I think like the thoughts for ULURP right now, what we've heard is there's some set of people who have said that, ULURP could be shortened. So for example, like the community board review period, which runs 60 days, and then there's a borough president review period. Perhaps they could run concurrently. That would save 30 days. And these things actually matter a lot because all of that review time is time where you have, you're owning this property, you've taken loans out. So those 30 days can actually start to add up.
That makes sense. Never shorten the community board time because for a number of reasons, but if you don't have your meeting on a certain date, you could lose.
Yeah, I think
only have one meeting.
60 days is already like the bare minimum of making sure that we can always have like committee and then full board.
But
And
usually the borough
very-
president should be participating
Yeah,
while that's going on.
I was gonna say, we're very lucky that our staff is significantly smaller than the councils, but we have 3 people who are on community boards. So we're all very like, guys, don't mess with like the CV stuff, so, yeah.
Adam, given where you are, this commission in the process, is any of this going to be ready for voting in 2025?
So how this works is the commissioners will decide what they want to put on the ballot. They could decide to put 1 question on the ballot, 0 questions on the ballot, 40 questions on the ballot. Looking at past commissions, which is how the commissioners tend to like look at things, it tends to be like 0 to 6 questions. Feels like the right amount before voters kind of drop off. If they want to have things on the ballot, they need to make a decision in July in order to submit it to the clerk in time for things to make it to the ballot in November. So that's why this process for both of them runs from like winter through spring to midsummer. It's not, sometimes people bring ULURP applications in the summer because we're not here. Like this is just a case where the deadline is in July, so that's kind of what determines the process. So where we are now is like we've had this preliminary report, and now we're getting feedback. We have a hearing tomorrow in the Bronx. We have another one in Manhattan, one in Staten Island. We've had one in Queens, Brooklyn. We're getting lots of feedback, both in terms of like people coming to the hearings, people submitting written testimony, and that influences kind of these areas to explore of which one the commissioners might decide is like worth looking at, or they might say like, actually, you know, we think the process works. We don't want to make changes. Yeah, so lots of people are, basically this is the time where people have been looking at these ideas and saying, we like this, we don't like this. If you do this, make sure you do this, that sort of thing.
Is there any room in the charter revision process as distinct from local laws for making it less expensive for a developer to actually build this building?
So earlier I talked about things that the state controls.
Right.
So things like, we don't really have this for market rate development, but the wage and labor standards that you need to hit to use state property tax exemptions, again, that's a state issue.
Right.
In terms of what the city can do, the city and the charter specifically,
But like the licensing process, speed that up.
that's not really a charter issue. That's something that you would want to fix through local law, right? Like agencies doing a better job. The charter things are, you could make processes shorter, or you could make them more certain, right? If you make things happen faster or you remove uncertainty, those are the two ways you can kind of make things essentially less expensive.
I don't think I'm gonna. What license? Which, what are you talking about, licensing?
Like permits, like could you make
Oh.
DEP permits less expensive?
permits.
Like theoretically, yes. In the charter, you could say like a building permit can cost no more than $1. It's just like
But
bad practice
permits
to
are-
put things like that.
Permit prices are in the code, actually.
Right, and then if you change the charter, it would require the code to change. So you could do that, but in general, the idea of the charter is the charter lays out the balance of power and processes. And so if you're changing things other than that, that should be what the city council does, and the city council should change those rules. So we're not doing anything that the city council can do. If the city council could do it, hopefully they would do it.
So what's the process going?
Okay.
Yeah, so should we, maybe we'll recirculate rather than documents?
Yeah, 'cause
And then-
we can't keep talking.
Set up a meeting for late June, does that sound right? Okay. Okay,
Just remember that we have an extra for.
right, so the whole reason we moved our meeting was theoretically so that we could get a resolution ratified. We might miss that opportunity, but
Well, I mean, if we
I don't know how that works.
are able to craft something where it doesn't have a full board vote,
Mhm.
are we willing, is the chair
You could
willing
send it,
to submit it anyway?
if
Well,
the
we
chair's
could-
willing, we have sometimes sent something that had
A
the
committee vote.
committee vote without the.
Okay, so then maybe that's a workaround.
Or even sometimes a letter that says we've expressed some concerns, or people have expressed some concerns.
Rather than a resolution.
Without describing it as a board position.
And if it meets the district needs, then it can definitely be a letter.
For sure.
Is there any reason to believe that the mayor may not put any proposals on and that the city council will?
The mayor has zero control over this. So essentially, like, the way to think about this is the mayor created a commission.
Right.
Commissioners were appointed, and if you look at testimony from our Queens hearing, you'll hear Councilmember Lincoln Ressler say, this isn't the mayor's commission, this is Maria Torres Springer's commission.
Yeah.
So it's basically, that's his, I would, I'm not gonna say anything, but they're independent commissioners who
Okay.
can do whatever they want, and the mayor has zero role. in
Just
what
like
they
the
do.
community board members to the borough president.
Exactly, yeah.
It can do whatever it wants.
So you're there. Is there any reason to think that the mayoral commission will not put anything on the ballot?
I mean,
Because we're
Yeah.
talking about it, we're gonna spend some time focusing on it.
I think it's fairly likely that they move forward with something. Again, like, we've just talked about housing today. There's a lot of discussion about procurement. There's been a lot of discussion about changes to elections and primaries. A lot of people have come to talk about like the, all sorts of other things. Yeah.
So the council's out.
The council can't put ballot.
Pardon?
The
Right.
council,
If they, right, if you do.
Theirs would run through 2026, and we've had that in the past. For example, the commission that gave us ranked choice voting, that was a commission that had been formed, didn't have things on the ballot,
Yes,
ran for longer, and then put things on the following year.
and the
Yeah.
city
So Adam, do you
council
see
can't
the
be
housing
until
land
twenty
use stuff?
twenty-six.
not
I-
going
I-
forward?
I
You
will not
give
know.
us that? Oh,
I will not know.
It's just a decision made by
The commissioners will like have a vote and will decide it. So all we do is like, we put forward like more of a report, then they can decide to adopt it. But in the past, like commissions have, you know, at the last second, gotten cold feet about things or added brand new, like 1975 is a great example of like, at the very end, they added a bunch of new stuff and all the stuff we've been working for got dropped.
Okay. Do you want to sit here and draw?
Yeah. So we have one more item. Alex, if you could share the slides for the Manhattan plan. Please. So about 2 weeks ago, the co-chairs of various community boards were invited by DCP to a presentation about the Manhattan plan. The Manhattan plan is a plan by the city to build 100,000 units of new housing in Manhattan. Over 10 years.
Any of them here?
Huh?
Any of them here?
Well, that's what they were focused on. So basically what they're asking for is for the community boards, any stakeholder, any citizen to come up with suggestions, not just about sites or rezonings, or how we should go about this. So I'll run through a quick view.
Sorry, Alex, that's not the one.
Yeah, I can email them.
No, it's not this presentation.
Let me email them to you.
It sounds like I'm sorry. I get it.
The time is.
I just get.
About 200 units are owned that had nobody on it. It's owned by the city.
Seema,
Free
well,
free and clear by the city.
we just figuring that out. Would it be out of order to ask if we have any update on we were gonna, Beverly was gonna form a committee or something to deal with the Excel center?
Yes, we do have an update. So in conversation with Beverly, we sort of created a working group, which are people with expertise, people raise their hand, basically, they're interested in this. And then for our meetings with Excel, we drafted Louisa to come with us for her zoning expertise. We have a date scheduled after, I can't even tell you how many millions of emails for June 19th, which I hope will be actually happening. And then we need to schedule a pre-meeting with the working group before that, so hopefully in the next week or so. And then the plan is to report back to the Housing and Land Use Committee on a regular basis to keep everyone apprised. Oh, great, okay. And then the one other thing is, oh,
There it is.
is that shared? Oh, she's shared. it.
Yeah, she's sharing it.
Oh, perfect, okay, great.
Okay, so this is the Manhattan plan. So I'll just say next slide.
Yeah.
Whenever I'm ready. So you can go to the next one. I'm trying to be quick. Next slide, please. All right, so like I said, the Manhattan plan is a plan to address the housing crisis by adding 100,000 new homes in our borough over the next 10 years. So the idea is that they are seeking for reviewing and refreshing zoning, exploring new policies and regulatory tools, etc. Ideas for us to think out of the box beyond what we've been thinking so far. Next slide, please. Okay, so why do we need to grow? We kind of go through this part quickly. Next slide. So here, one of the reasons why the thought is that housing should be in Manhattan is guess what the best jobs are. So it's thought it was more fair to people if there's some, affordable, not just low income affordable, but just affordable for regular workers to have a place to live. It doesn't cost $8,000 a month. Next slide, please. So this is a slide of Manhattan's housing production. It's going down, but as we know, population is growing. Manhattan produced less housing than any other borough besides Staten Island. We know that in our district has produced negative housing because there's more units that get combined than get built. And for instance, in 2024, we produced 0 units of affordable housing in our district. Next slide, please.
Sorry, really quickly, can you go back to that slide?
Yeah.
So is this new housing each year?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is, okay, just sorry.
Yeah.
No, I want to say, it's not just total housing, it's new housing
New
being
housing,
built each year. Okay.
New housing.
But definitionally, that means Manhattan as a population of the whole city is declining.
No, the
Yeah,
point is that Manhattan's population is much less than these other boroughs, than 2 other boroughs, right? So the
Yeah.
idea that its housing population is slowing is not the craziest thing when you think about the fact of how many more people live in Brooklyn and Queens. That's all. That's what I'm trying to understand this.
But okay. All right, so this is a map of housing production, house uneven. So if you look and see out in our neighborhood, that red area, negative units over the past 10 years, okay? That's overall units. And then in the lower part of the district, we had less than 2,500 units in 10 years. So we can hopefully put our heads together and maybe do better than that.
And this is all type of housing?
All housing, total housing.
So all the housing on 91st Street, 93rd Street, 95th Street, 96th
All
Street,
that, yeah.
all that's,
That's all included.
Yeah, so we
Because
added
they've lost
696, but lost.
Basically, if you look at it from a project basis, we were only saved by the development at like 60th and West End.
Yeah.
Like if that hadn't
Waterline
existed,
Park,
this map would look so much worse.
Yeah.
And the
That's a
only
great metaphor.
the only rezoning we had in this entire time period is that one and the Wish Fish on 106th. Those are the only 2 you learned.
108.
108, sorry,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay,
but,
next.
but I just want to say, we rezoned 9700 10th Street to restrict overdevelopment.
And
So-
now maybe we're like.
So maybe it was
oops,
successful.
rethinking. Yeah.
All is bad, now all is good.
Yep, so this slide is showing that Manhattan is becoming unaffordable. We all know these stats, the rents are very high. We can go to the next slide. And then affordable housing, you can see where affordable housing has been created through MIH. And there's very little in our district, and Manhattan, but definitely in our district. Next slide, please. So now is the time to act. So City of Yes was passed, but it's not enough to fix the housing problem. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Sorry.
The inflation.
Yeah, so as
2010 to date. So
as we know,
50%.
Manhattan has a lot of neighborhoods with access to jobs, transit, and other resources. So, you know, if you think about, you know, transit-oriented development or people having short commutes, from that standpoint, it makes sense to create housing in Manhattan. But then we also, as Sheldon just pointed out, many of those same districts with access to transit and jobs have restricted housing from being built. Next slide, please. This is some examples, the Hudson Yards sub-district at 125th, and then Midtown South. So as you know, Midtown South is going through rezoning to allow for residential, and then Hudson Yards and 125th have also done or examining similar zoning. Next slide, please. And then how should we grow is the next question. So SHAG, you can include MIH. You can have 12 plus FAR, as you know, with R11, R12, but that would require a minimum amount of affordable housing, exploring changes in parking requirements, using publicly owned sites, streamlining processes as we've been discussing, and then different construction methods that would include things like modular housing that can be very quick and very, very cheap. I've actually, in my other life, financed a lot of modular housing, including 461D in Brooklyn, which is like the largest modular housing at the time. I financed one in the Bronx by Fordham that was like 40 minutes, and it was constructed in like half a day. Trucks pulled up about 8 o'clock in the morning. They were done by 1 p.m. And you had 30 units of student housing, moderately priced housing that students could live in. Created and managed by a nonprofit. So anyway, next slide, please. So this is how the plan is going to be developed. There's a period starting now in June through September, which is for ideas generation. And then once those ideas are transmitted to the city, they will formulate the final Manhattan plan, which will be published in December. So what we would like to do tonight is to take volunteers for a working group who can work on the ideas that and then bring them back to the committee. So the work will go on over the summer, and then that working group will present a set of ideas to this committee. So if anyone would like to join this working group, raise your hand.
Richard, volunteer Ethel. I'll volunteer Ethel.
Yeah, unfortunately, this is going to be the committee of unpopular ideas.
That's fine.
That's the problem.
I noticed there's no reference to conversion of commercial to residential, is it?
There is. I mean, that's all on the table. Everything's on the table there. So one thing I'll mention is that Community Board 8 on the Upper East Side, they have basically done this process already. They had a working group, task force that was impaneled, and they went through a very rigorous process. It took them 1 year. They went lot by lot. And their task force, there are a lot of people who were very against it at first. But that working group actually voted unanimously. With some of the people who were really against it were like the biggest proponents. The committee voted unanimously, and then the full board passed it unanimously. And theirs focused solely on converting manufacturing, like physical manufacturing, to residential. So it's public. I can send that around to the working group. Yeah, send it around. They have it goes lot by lot.
But they have that.
Yeah, we
We don't have any of
So
that.
we don't.
Just an example. Just an example.
The other thing they
But that's
also,
easy.
the other thing they also mentioned is, are there policy changes that are limiting development right now that we should be looking at?
Right.
So.
Yeah. So yeah.
They're interested in everything.
Yeah, we
So all
have
the
we have a
ideas-
blank mandate. We can say whatever we want. We can say no changes, everything's great, right? We can say blow up the whole system, you know? We can say here's 3 sites we really like.
We're only looking at our district.
Our
Each,
district, that's correct.
each district is doing their own.
Okay.
So
idea
we're not,
generation.
we're not going to be weighing in on whether it's a good idea for Manhattan in general, but just for our.
It's just for our district.
So in other words, parking minimums wouldn't apply because there are none here.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So you could, so I mentioned the CB8 example, CB4 did a similar thing. So they took, so they're just very extensive. So they took like what CDBS would allow, and they have like 5 different areas, right? And for each area, they have certain guidelines that they've proposed. But yeah, we can do whatever we like. I mean, there's some of this work has been done, as you know, the borough president has he had his 173 sites that he added to the list. I think it's only 3 in our district, right? There's 3 of them. So do you like those 3 sites? Do we have more?
Do we know what they are?
What are they?
I can.
And there are a couple on 109,
we know-
110.
We have one of them, so.
And there's one on the west side, I think.
Yeah, I can't remember.
But yeah, it's fun. I'll put that, I'm gonna create a folder for this working group. I'm gonna put in all these things I mentioned, in there, and we can, you know, start from there.
But by the way, 109th Street is now, the stores are now closed. On the site on 109th Street. Somehow the stores over the past few months have closed. And Spectrum, which is on the corner of 109th going to 110th, has closed also, which is very interesting.
Sounds like somebody's developing something.
What's that?
Something's going on.
Yeah, I'll say the Spectrum closed on 64th Street as well.
Also.
Yeah.
Okay.
The other thing I'll say is it's like city-owned lots are really interesting. I know sometimes we have community board meetings in the penthouse at Lincoln Center. But like that building has a fire station, a library, the Juilliard dorms, all of this. So there's also the possibility of like, if we have fire stations, a lot of them are really old, like libraries, like those are also definitely opportunities to.
They've been taking down some of the libraries, the Inwood Library
Yeah, and
notably.
it's beautiful. I don't know if you've been, the library is like
But
absolutely.
the new Inwood Library?
No. It's the most beautiful library in New York City.
The Far Rockaway one, right?
Oh, I was thinking of the one in Inwood. Okay, actually, the 42nd Street Library is the prettiest, but then this could be the second prettiest.
It looks significant at affordable housing.
Yeah.
Well, I think that there's some talk about the Bloomingdale Library as a site.
Oh, interesting.
So you mentioned CB8 and CB4. How far along, do you have a sense of how the process is going?
For them?
Borough-wide or even citywide? I'm just curious.
Those are 2 that I know of
Where
that.
we are in the process.
So this was like rolled out in an interesting fashion, right? In that it was only for co-chairs, of housing and land use co-chairs. And the idea, they had consultants on board and they're in this, what they call idea generating phase. It does not strike me as what we have typically seen in terms of a neighborhood plan, you know, with planners looking at things in great detail. This seems like, hey, let's throw a lot of stuff out there and then a plan is generated. So it's unclear exactly where it goes from here. I think it's important that we get our ideas.
I mean,
Yeah, I was more curious where I hear what you're saying. Thank you, by the way. for your presentation. I hear what you're saying about where it goes. I was curious where it's been.
So I think that the 2 examples that Tibita gave, I think were the more traditional rezonings, like neighborhood rezonings done through city planning, lots of resources brought to bear and long processes.
Right.
But neither of those have been rezoned. Those were just like the community board saying like.
Yeah, nothing happened.
Yeah.
So
In the process,
yeah, so on the way I even heard about the CBA one was on the call as they were presenting this exact presentation to us. The housing chair from CB8 rose her hand and said, hey, we did this, we put together a whole plan, you know, and we said.
It wasn't part of this process.
He said, yeah, before the process, like, you know, they started November 2023, it's all online. They passed the full board in January 2025, okay, this January. They sent it to DCP and no response. We're busy, we're working on a HAD plan or working on CBS, nothing. So now they were complaining about that, right?
And so she brought it up in the context of
Yeah,
this.
Yeah, so then I reached out to her and said, let's talk about it. So I met with her and she told me the whole story, which I can, I won't bore you with everything, but I can relay that to the working committee, about what the process and stuff.
Who was overseeing the Manhattan plan?
City planning.
City planning.
City planning.
So this presentation was by city planning to the committee co-chairs.
I just want to mention that a lot of the bigger sites actually have studies that the city, whether through NYCHA or whether through the Educational Construction Fund, have done, and those have received iceberg treatment by the community. And in fact, we had a city council election, I guess, maybe 12, 16 years ago, where the ECF plan became a pinwheel, which the primary spun around.
What's the ECF plan?
Sorry, Educational Construction Fund. And so they talked about using the high school at 96th and First, which was not our district, but they also had 191 and 199 as sites.
But they did do the school on the east side.
I mean, they were not, well, I'm just gonna say, I'm not gonna plus or minus, but they were not well received. Same thing for some of the infills at Douglas.
Right.
And right now I've heard some talk of the library and the firehouse on 100th Street as well, because one of the arguments was made for 100th Street parking lot at Douglas was, who wants to live next to a firehouse? So the answer is move the firehouse, and then you have the parking lot and the firehouse and the police station. I'm just giving you, these are things that have been discussed, and city planning is probably everybody that knew about these is retired, but that's a different issue.
But I think part of the Manhattan plan is basically, we were just talking about how the big rezoning that we did on the upper west side, now we're like, maybe that wasn't, maybe we would do it differently now. I think the Manhattan plan is really noticing that there's like a shift and starting to be like, okay, let's comprehensively like reassess some of this and figure out like, what are the really good ideas? And I think the other thing is, because the environmental review has gotten so complicated, it really makes sense to kind of go bigger rather than smaller, right? Like part of the, like you can't, like a rezoning for 1,000 units still requires a gigantic environmental review. And the environmental review is, minimally longer if you make it 5,000 units, so you may as well go bigger. So I think this is basically gonna.
Wasn't that like West Side Futures from the 80s, right?
We did that, but it was.
It was 40 years ago.
Yeah, and that concluded that we should upzone somewhat.
Right.
But didn't go anywhere.
I do
And
think,
no one seems to have a copy of it. No one seems to have a copy of it.
West Side Futures?
Yeah.
I do think it'd be helpful to get all these reports together, because one of the complaints, at least in the session that I went to, is that boards have done a lot of these reports, but they've not been received well by city planning or whoever, and therefore they've just languished when there's actually some community.
Michael Ortler has a copy.
City planning must have a copy.
Can ask me.
So I think, none
It'd
of
just be
our.
nice historically to have.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's really relevant today.
No, it isn't, but it'd just be
It's,
interesting.
they put in a lot of work.
They
so-
did, but it'd be nice to see the kind of thing that they
I
did.
have just an off-topic question. I read that New York City has lost, I don't know, 300,000 residents in the last, I don't know, 5 years.
Since COVID, yeah.
Since the pandemic.
And school population has gone down.
About 100.
And yet the housing shortage has increased. And I'm having trouble figuring out
Well,
why.
one thing that's relevant to this condition is Manhattan has gained residents since before COVID.
Okay.
So that's part of it.
And
Manhattan
we've lost, so a lot of buildings have, like my building had 540 units in it, and that has closer to 500 units, or maybe less. And some of the townhouses that were
No, I know.
housed 6
No,
or 7
I
families.
know why the west side is less populated today than it was 30 years ago. And then obviously you have these side street buildings that are now one family.
Yeah.
Right.
And they used to be 8 families or 6. But overall,
Yeah, overall Manhattan has increased in population and decreased in housing. Right, and part of the reason, location. So like, all the areas that are fast growing, the housing stock there is not growing as fast as population. So that drives up prices, you know, not just Manhattan, but in like Western Brooklyn, you know, all these places. So that's why overall the price of housing is
And
going
then
up.
you also have where the building that's next to Louisa, it's now a fancier building,
Right.
has fewer apartments in it than it did when it was, you know, affordable housing.
Yeah, or like that, like you were mentioning that building on 88th and Broadway, right? Like,
That, so most of the time, I was saying there are like a couple examples of like buildings replacing existing buildings that have fewer units. But the main driver is not unit combinations, it's people who are working from home and want an extra bedroom. That's the primary driver.
Larger apartments.
It's just like the number of people per unit is declining. Because people have less roommates and
That's,
things.
I mean, that's the problem with the ABC side. It's
Yeah.
an awful lot of FAR
But
for
so few
very
units.
few people.
Yes.
Right.
So I have a question for everybody. If you're coming to the potluck next Tuesday, just let me know, because we're trying to keep
Wait,
it
the
tacked.
potluck is next Tuesday.
Yes,
When is the full board
the
June
25th.
meeting?
25th.
What,
The
Second
20
one. It's
what
the
time is
second
the
full board
potluck?
meeting is the
6 to
25th.
8.
Is
I
there
wish,
steering?
I wish it were later in the summer. I could produce from my garden. I could bring in all
Well, we
kinds
can
of
do another one when your garden's
but,
full. Let us know.
Okay, next Tuesday.
Is there steering
Good
also, or is
report.
it just potluck?
It's just potluck.
Yep.
I just need to know if you're coming and what your